Good afternoon and welcome to today's Snack and Share support group. My name is Cheryl Johnson Ransaw. I am the director for the Office of Employee Development and Wellness Services, better known as EDWS. If this is your first time attending our Snack and Share support group, we extend a big welcome. If you have attended before, then we want to welcome you back. Before we get into today's topic, I'd like to just go over a couple of objectives and other housekeeping matters. This session will be recorded today and will only be made available to attendees. The objectives for Snack and Share support group, this historically was developed out of a concern about trying to offer something virtually at the start of COVID-19. And so overall, our objectives were then and still continue to be to create a safe virtual space to gather and gain a sense of belonging. We are here to discuss work-life concerns, and this is open. There are various topics that we offer, but we invite feedback and input, suggesting other topics that we may consider in future planning. This initiative is one that's intended to offer an opportunity for people to de-stress during challenging times, generally speaking. And the bottom line message that we always emphasize is to encourage the practice of self-care, that which all of us can control. We also want to provide information on different Georgia State and University System of Georgia resources, particularly as it relates to well-being. And bottom line, as I mentioned, we always want to invite feedback on your current concerns and suggestions as we plan for future topics. Just a few ground rules to highlight. We generally want to encourage that all of us be respectful of everyone in attendance and just acknowledge that all of us come with different beliefs and perspectives and backgrounds, and that's fine, that's okay. And we want people, again, to feel safe and comfortable knowing that this is an inclusive environment. We ask that you give yourself permission to be wherever you are in terms of your attendance and presence and participation level. We certainly do encourage you to share concerns and ask questions, and we will raise questions and ask that you might consider replying, but we don't want to impose any pressure on anyone to feel that you are obligated to participate verbally. What's said in these gatherings stays here. And so again, we want to emphasize that this is intended to be a confidential, safe virtual space. And we know that most of you may be coming at a time that you're taking lunch or a break. And so we're happy if that is the case for you. And if so, then certainly encourage that you might grab a snack and let this be an opportunity to de-stress. We invite you to use the chat box. If you have questions or concerns, if you're having any technical difficulties, please make note of that. I will be monitoring the chat box throughout the session. And if I raise questions and ask for some response, then please note that I will be checking, and you don't have to hold off though on any comments that you might want to make throughout the session. If there aren't any questions at this time, we'll move forward. And I'd like to just touch on a little more context in terms of the history of how and why we decided to offer these gatherings. Uh, Certainly 2020 was a horrific year in terms of a pandemic affecting everyone on all levels. And it came, and certainly as we talk about this one stressor that had so many impactful uh, results, we also want to recognize that everyone's situation as it relates to COVID-19 certainly is unique and different. We may share some similarities in terms of experiences, but we've always wanted to just recognize that everyone's story is unique and different, and we don't minimize on what kinds of challenges people have had just because of dealing with that stressor alone, uh, particularly when we talk about the makeup of someone's household, responsibilities in terms of family, friends, support groups. Those of you who may have children or child care providers as well as elder care providers, anyone responsible for others in the larger context, we know that that just adds to responsibilities and pressures and stressors that people have. And so this has been quite a journey for everyone, respectfully acknowledging the different stories and experiences that people may have. And as we approach this year end of 2024, we certainly recognize 4 years post-COVID kick off in 2020 that we have come a long way. Things are at a much better place. It's been about major transitions for everyone. Again, recognizing in different ways. We certainly are, generally speaking, back in the workplace. Some people may be working hybrid schedules. Some people may be working remotely even still. So there are different scenarios, different precautions that are still needed to be taken, particularly as we just talk about coping and managing the stress of this new pandemic era, this new normal that we're faced with. And in addition to just identifying the pandemic, the COVID-19, that was the life-altering trigger for people a few years ago, we also want to recognize that when we talk about stress and life stressors, that there are a number of other stressors that people are faced with to add to COVID-19. And so this slide is just really wanting to pause and acknowledge the fact that this is a list of a lot of different stressors, but there's no way we can capture everything for everybody. But this gives a picture that, again, should tell the story, acknowledging that there are a lot of different stressors that people may be dealing with. Some that are positive, and a lot of times we do tend to focus more on the negative stressors, the problem stressors, for I think somewhat obvious reasons, because they can perhaps comparatively speaking be more challenging. But stress can certainly be caused by positive experiences, happy occasions and events, and so those are equally important to recognize, as well as just the fact that we talk about stress management and balancing work-life challenges. the more stressors that we're dealing with, both positive and negative, the more challenging that it can be, the more that it can really have an impact on our mental and physical health. And when we talk about adding up the stressors that we're dealing with, it's also important to recognize that our bodies don't distinguish between what's negative and what's positive. Our bodies only deal with the fact that we are faced with a lot of stressors, whatever they might be. And the more we're dealing with, the more prolonged periods of time that we're faced with stressors, then that's when there are potentially some other problems that might develop, including some health conditions, medical conditions, both physically as well as mentally. So it's important to certainly address stress and to look at coping. And again, this gathering is really just another way of trying to provide an opportunity for people to process and to realize that as we gather, that there are other people that certainly can relate to what we're dealing with, what we're talking about. And as we have looked at our journey to wellness on this campus, and there may be others attending this gathering from other campuses within the USG, overall talk about wellness, we really want to just acknowledge the multi-dimensions of wellness. There's so many different aspects that are equally important to address. And so this wellness wheel gives you an idea, an illustration of what we envision is critical to consider for planning purposes, for programming purposes. And with that in mind, for today's topic, we are discussing dealing with grief and loss during the holiday season. As we pause to talk about the holiday season, and obviously we're now at a point of literally counting down this week for campuses to close for the winter break. And for a lot of people, we talk about just wrapping up the work aspect. There may be a lot of tasks, a lot of responsibilities of just, again, managing work life, both in the workplace as well as personally. But aside from just preparing for time off, and certainly that is something I think that all of us can relate to, also want to pause and recognize that the holiday season has different meanings for different people, and people have different backgrounds and from different cultures. And so it's important to pause and acknowledge that and be respectful of that, and not assume that everyone shares our own beliefs. Certainly for some people, this is a time for celebrations. Tis the season for that to occur. But again, we are here to just acknowledge that that is not the case for all. Some of that may have to do with different beliefs and cultures, but also some of it may be due to this being a tough time for people, particularly those who have experienced grief and loss. And as we touched on COVID-19 earlier, certainly we know that a lot of people struggled with illnesses and deaths resulting from COVID-19. And again, that it's been different for different people, but But a lot of lives were lost during that period. But we know that a lot of losses have occurred and do occur for other reasons as well. And so this is a time to pause and recognize that. I mentioned that we, I think, universally can relate to the fact that for most people, the holiday season does represent a break, vacation, holiday leave available. And so I believe it's safe to say that most of us are inviting the opportunity to have a break. And again, being respectful of that, we shouldn't assume that that's the case for everybody, but if you have different thoughts, different reactions, please feel free to enter your comments, responses in the chat box. And on that note, too, please feel free to just note what kinds of experiences you are dealing with this holiday season, as well as in the past. And certainly the holidays typically represent a time of reflection. It's natural to reflect and recall past seasons, past years. And so particularly when we talk about some stressors, perhaps more so the negative ones, including the recognition of losses occurring, that this is when it may be difficult and very intense for people can relate to that who have had experiences and are dealing with grief and loss. I'd like to offer some tips for coping with grief and loss, and we may touch on a number of considerations that may be helpful, but we also recognize that one size doesn't fit all, and it may not be simplistic for some people trying to cope, but it is important for everybody dealing with grief and loss to just pause and acknowledge and accept your feelings, whatever they are. That is where it's important to give yourself permission first to acknowledge the emotions, to acknowledge the thoughts, whatever they are. And hopefully this is not something new, but if it is, then that is something to make a goal. If it's been a struggle to even acknowledge your feelings, your thoughts, that in itself is a goal to consider addressing, because it really becomes a matter of trying to figure out what you need to do that's going to help you feel better, feel right. And again, that is going to be different approaches for different people. But again, the first step is just to acknowledge and think about where you are. And if you're dealing with very real losses, whether it's recent and or not so recent, that too can make it more intense and emotional for a lot of people, because the holidays in particular can be a time when perhaps people have had losses to occur, but it's certainly a time when you think about perhaps those loved ones who are no longer with you. And so those loved ones might have been passed on some time ago, but it brings up memories. It brings up all of those thoughts and reflections. And again, that's okay. That's important to allow yourself to recognize whatever you're thinking and feeling or whomever you're thinking about. And as you do that, trying to find some balance in managing the emotions, managing the stress, balancing work, life, day to day. Sometimes it can be helpful as you are figuring out different approaches to consider focusing on other people. So certainly if you have responsibilities, if you are, you know, a caregiver, you have kids, you have a family, relatives, friends, it can be therapeutic to consider focusing on other people. Other people may be struggling in different ways, but may have different needs that could make a difference if you offer to be supportive, to give, and be there for them. Takes your mind off of perhaps your own struggles for a time. Certainly it's not the cure-all, but it can be helpful when you can shift and not focus all of the time on all of the difficult emotions that you may be experiencing as it particularly relates to grief and loss. Also planning ahead. So just getting organized with your day to day. And again, I want to recognize that this may be a very busy time for a lot of people for a number of reasons, including just wrapping up the workplace responsibilities as we count down for winter break, and then just adding that to whatever other responsibilities you have in your personal life and how much that is. It certainly will have a lot to do in terms of the amount of stress you're dealing with, but it definitely pays to plan ahead and to get as organized as possible with your day-to-day activities and schedule. A lot of things we can't control. We know that there are a lot of variables we can't control, which can make it challenging, more challenging. But for that you can do and look ahead to plan thoughtfully, that can make a difference as well. Do something different, and this is, I think, a very important tip for people to consider, particularly when you know that you may be struggling with past traditions or coping with grief and loss, and associating perhaps past memories with those for whom you are grieving, those you're missing. And so if it is difficult to think about carrying on some of the same traditions, then there's nothing written that says that you can't do something different. This is where it's important to just take charge and make decisions to do what feels right. And so that's something that you might hopefully talk over with other family or friends, depending on who's in your circle. But the goal is one of just thinking outside of the box, thinking outside of the norm. The other thought is to just skip celebrations. Where is it written that you have to do certain things when it comes to the holidays? And again, even certain traditions might be broken, might be reconsidered. That's a personal belief, that's a personal prerogative that everybody has. And so sometimes to take the pressure off and the stress off, it's just better to decide and be proactive about it, that you're not going to do anything this year. And last but not least, we want to recognize that this is also a time when you're struggling with grief and loss and just trying to figure out how to cope, how to manage emotions, to consider getting support, both first looking at your support system, your informal support system in terms of family, friends, colleagues. It's important to have connections, social connections. This is a time that it helps to have people you're close to, people who care about you, people you can talk with if you want to share about your feelings around grief or loss or whatever other concerns you may have. It's also a time to think about professional help, getting support, talking to someone, a counselor can be very beneficial, particularly if you are dealing with grief and loss, whether it's recent losses or not. The takeaway message is one that this really is all about recognizing that grieving is a very individual and personal journey. And it is just that, it's a journey. There's nothing written that says you should be or have to be reconciled or resolved in your grief at a certain point in time. This is where it's critical for everyone to be sensitive of others' feelings and know that whatever it's going to take to help to learn how to cope, that it's an individual process and it is a journey, and we want to be supportive and respectful. Here, I'd like to pause and just ask you to think about what's on your mind. Obviously, we've had our main topic for discussion, and I'm interested if anyone has thoughts, reflections they'd like to share about the topic, but what else might be on your mind. And just generally speaking, ask yourself, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Ask yourself, have you been practicing self-care and doing what's within your control in terms of taking charge of your physical, mental, and emotional health? If you have been, that's great. If you want to share any thoughts about what you've done that's been helpful, what you're doing, what you've tried, welcome and invite that. If you've been struggling or feeling challenged by practicing self-care, we invite those comments as well. Certainly you're welcome to tell us in the chat, or if you would like to speak, we can unmute you and allow you to do that as well at this time. The bottom line message here is that there's no wrong way to feel. This is not about judgment. This is not about pressure. It's just offering the opportunity to share if you're comfortable. I don't see any comments in the chat box. So we will continue to move through this session today and shift to encourage more mindfulness and take a moment to just encourage that all of us try to focus on the present and allow yourself to hopefully sit quietly and comfortably in reflection as you focus on the present, that hopefully there are some positive thoughts, even if you just acknowledge that you've taken the time to break and attend this gathering, to pause, to allow yourself that break. And that's a positive thing, to stop for a moment, to try to hopefully relax for a moment before you get back into the challenges, the responsibilities of the rest of your day and the rest of your days. We encourage mindfulness as a practice regularly. We all need those breaks, and that is essentially what this represents. It's being intentional about taking a break, to pause. There's no time minimum or maximum. It's just being intentional about taking the time. That's the most important objective. As we've mentioned before, we always underscore the importance of self-care overall. The spirit of what is intended here for this gathering. It's inviting people to really focus in on what you can control, what you can do day to day, and not overlook or minimize even the very basics of self-care daily, from just paying attention to getting proper rest and sleep, looking at your nutrition, looking at physical activity. We've talked about how important it is to relax, to take those breaks and recharge. And we can always build and expand on our support system for strength. Relationships are so key, and perhaps underestimate the value as well. Again, we talk about inviting people to consider getting professional help when it's needed. And that's going to certainly be different considerations just depending on the different circumstances of every individual. But what we want everyone to do is to just take action and not stay stuck in a place if you know that you're struggling, and that help could make the difference. And starting with Georgia State campus resources, this is an opportunity to just highlight some offices that are available, starting with our own office, Employee Development and Wellness Services, offering the worksite wellness and integrated EAP services for faculty and staff. This PowerPoint presentation will be sent to attendees, so you don't have to worry about jotting down this information. To a follow-up and include a brief survey to invite your feedback on this gathering. We also just want to acknowledge that the University System of Georgia has some great resources available as it relates to well-being resources, including the Accenture Health External EAP, which is available to offer at no cost short-term counseling services, professional services, work-life resources, including legal, financial, childcare, and elder care. So this is a resource that we just really encourage people to check out. Their call, as well as look up the website on your own time to just check out all of the great information that's available and the great support and assistance that is available as well. As we prepare to wrap up today's session, again, I invite any comments, last thoughts or questions today, as well as just encourage you to consider providing feedback at any time, but certainly look out for our email to follow with the survey, inviting your input, and that includes inviting you to offer some suggestions for future topics that we might discuss in this support group setting. We want this to be a meaningful gathering and talk about relevant topics that are helpful. And so the more information we receive from you, then the more intentional we certainly will try to be as we plan ahead for the future. This represents our last gathering for 2024. We start back up after the winter break in January. I'd like to thank everyone again for attending today's session and wish you well. Please do take care, stay safe and healthy during the holiday winter break. Bye now.